we're somehow some kind in between. As a board member of the Architects Council, I really want to welcome you here in this session. The Architects Council, as Architects Council of Europe, we represent 600,000 architects in Europe. So this topic for us is highly interesting, and we are very, very happy that Judith Kimpian really takes care of it together with Pierre out of the office of ACE, and yes, and the experts. And we are also very happy that the European Commission supports us throughout funding. And I want to thank Yves. I just met him today the first time, so Yves, thanks for having you here, and I will give you the floor now. Thanks. Yves? Yves got lost. Yves?
So ACE has been working with a number of different DGs over the past few years, and we've been very pleased to have DG Culture's funding and involvement in our work, and in particular, Yves participates in the UN Sustainable Development Goal Group of the UIA, and I thought it would be really lovely for him to introduce some of his background about this, and maybe have him heckle us later on.
Thank you for your warm welcome. I'm an architect, and I'm involved in sustainability with the UIA since a long time ago. The UIA decided to make a statement in the 1980 saying that the architecture and environment were interdependent. Congress after Congress, this statement becomes more and more alive. And lately in Seoul, for the last Congress, we decided to join the UN Sustainability, Development Group, and that means that we very much we want to say that sustainability is not only a question of energy, it's a question of society. It comes along with economic problem, social problem, and cultural problem. So I'm here to listen what's going on in the with the European Architects Council. And as far as I heard, I mean, we are on the same tracks, and I think that we are going to be able to enter the 17th goal, which is partnership. And so I'll be over there listening to you. And
thank you so much.
Bye bye.
So Yves has two hats on today. So he's also he's the representative of DG Culture, who's actually funding today's event, and it's really great that he's also involved in the UIA's work on sustainable development goals. And we have another member of the Commission here today, Josefina Lindblom, who's been leading the work on the EU Levels program, which is what this event is about today. And after her introduction to Levels, I'm going to give a brief summary of some of the feedback we have received from our architectural chamber members and piloters of Levels. And afterwards, we're going to open the floor to a debate. So we will have a number of excellent contributors. So Josefina will be joining the debate together with Brian Højbjerg Sorensen. I've practiced this, trust me. From Denmark, an architect from Arisden Arkitekter, also involved in the Levels pilot. Markus Müller, chairman of Sustainable Architecture Work Group at the Federal Chamber of German Architects and president of the Chamber of Architects in Baden-Württemberg in Germany. Dr. Sven Berman, who is a senior lecturer and also a researcher at University College London. who knows everything that needs to be known about building performance. And Dr. Anna Braun, who is Director of Research and Development at the German Sustainable Building Council. So Josefina, myself, debate, and closing lines. Here we go. Josefina, over to you.
Thank you. There's no particular place to put this in? Oh. It seems too big to me. Yeah. Oh, there. Oh, that's high tech. Starting well. So I can start, perhaps. Thank you for inviting me. I'm very happy to be here, and I see this as a great opportunity for me to learn from today's session. It's the first one. Yeah. Because it's going to be very interesting to hear from the panel what the feedback might be, what it looks like, and I would perhaps start by saying a particular thank you to those in the room who have tested levels, and I know that there's one in the panel as well, and I've seen many of your comments. So yeah, that's great. Thank you. I thought I would not be talking so much about what levels is actually now, because I have quite a limited time, and I was thinking that as we go into this session, hopefully most people have had the chance to know a little bit about what it is. I thought I would rather spend my time on showing you who are testing, which organizations are testing levels, and a little bit about what they are testing as well in levels. So apologies if that is a problem. You look a bit surprised. No? Okay, good. So I will not go through what levels is, more than to say that levels is it's a tool, it's a framework with a number of indicators to assess and report on the sustainability or the environmental performance of buildings, which we have developed together with a large number of stakeholders during the last couple of years, 3-4 years now, I think. It was presented, I have to think, which year are we now? 2019. It was presented in 2017, in the summer of 2017, and last year we kicked off a test phase of levels, which is going on a few more days. It ends by the end of this month. We knew that we had great collaboration and great feedback when we were developing levels, as I said, together with lots of stakeholders. What we didn't know before we kicked off the test phase was what would the reaction be to test levels. Would there be, great enthusiasm about developing it, but then no one actually wanted to do the job in looking at it and testing it and see what it was like. That phase was, of course, very important for us because we need to know what's working and what's not working so that we are sure that in about 1 year time we come with something which is useful and robust. But we had, I think, it went over our expectations when it comes to how many test projects signed up for this. We have over 130 projects throughout Europe testing the levels indicators, which are roughly about 10 indicators. I'll stand like this if that's okay. You can see that the projects are spread out in Europe. There are tests of renovation projects and new buildings. About 25% of the buildings are renovation projects. We also have offices and residential buildings, and there you have approximately half. So that's great. You see that they are spread out, but it is true that if we are going to be a bit critical, and I will show you another slide which shows that even better, we do lack some of this testing in Eastern Europe. That's a fact. We have some projects there as well, but not as many as in the rest of Europe. There are a few countries which are very well represented. It is Finland, which has, if I see them now, they have 23 projects. They're actually the government, the Ministry of Environment there was very much supporting testers to take part, or projects to take part here, because they are looking at how to use levels, or part of levels at least, in their national legislation. So they were very keen on seeing how this would fit into the Finnish context. But we also have countries such as France, Italy, which have a lot of projects as well. Denmark has very many as well, and we have a representative here, so that's great. What is the level of experience of the testers? This was something that we asked the testers when they registered initially, about 1 year ago then. And as you can see, about 40% said that they have a lot of experience in assessing sustainability performance. That is what this question relates to. About 40% have some experience, and then 16% say that they have no experience. And I would say that, of course, we are extremely happy for the feedback from all those, or for, first of all, that all these kinds of different experiences took part in testing levels. And we look very much forward to see the feedback from the different groups. I would say that this smaller group is fantastically important to us, because what we want to do with levels is eventually to be able to reach out to those kinds of projects which would normally not have looked into this in the first place. Hence, it is very important for us, if we want to mainstream sustainability of buildings and the assessment of sustainability of buildings, it's extremely important that it works for this group as well. Here I have combined the geography and the experience, and yeah, I guess it just shows more clearly, or it serves to show more clearly that the eastern part of Europe could be better represented here. So we will have to look into how we can get more information from that part of Europe in different ways. Who is testing levels then? So yeah, you can see that design team members, typically architects, are very well represented here. But we have all kinds of different kinds of professionals as well. They are all very important, of course. I think it's, for us also, coming from a public institution, it's great to see that there's quite a lot of projects which are being run by public authorities. So we can see how they see this tool as well. But yeah, there's a great variety. And architects very well represented. And then the question, at what life cycle stage then is levels tested? And this is the way it looks. If you're good at math, you quickly see that this becomes more than 130 something. But of course, some projects look at several stages. Yeah. But not surprisingly, the design stage comes up high, which is only natural, and I think good and important for us. So then, just to say something very small about, we looked, of course, at what kind of testers look at what kind of indicators. Levels have more or less 10 indicators, depending a little bit on how you see it. And we asked for a number of those indicators. I think there were 5 now, but I may be wrong. We asked all testers to look at least 5 of them. And not just any 5, but 5 in specific, because we thought they were sort of the core ones. And then we added on in 2 different additional tiers. We added on indicators which we would like them to test. So first of all, the core ones. Then, if they had a bit more of ambition and felt that they could do it, we suggested a few other ones. And then there was a last set of indicators which, if you really felt up for it, you could go for as well. So what did we see then? No, we could not see that there was a difference in the experience that they had reported. You remember this, a lot of experience, some experience, or no experience. They looked at the different kinds of indicators at the same high numbers, actually. The life cycle global warming potential was not part of the core one because it can be considered relatively complex. But it was tested by about 90% of the testers overall anyway, and which we found really great. And then the last question that we looked at as well was, does the testing and what you test depend on what kind of stakeholder you are? Yeah. We didn't see any difference when it came to who's testing residential, who's testing offices, new or renovation, etc., etc. But we could see that there was some difference in how you choose the indicators. And in particular, those indicators which were the most demanding, they were more looked at by the design teams than some of the other groups. Okay, the last slide that I have is just to say something about what is next, what comes next. As I said, we are ending this test phase, or rather the testers are ending their test phase by the end of this month. And then we expect to have reports back from them regarding the results that they got of the indicators that they tested. And by the end of September, we are also expecting to have the feedback in the shape of a survey, in the form of a survey that we have to the testers, which are more asking about general horizontal questions of how was it to work with levels. Then we will spend our time for the rest of 2019 to analyze this result, but also for my technical colleagues to choose a couple of projects which agree to be chosen to verify how they worked with levels. So it is not about going back and say, well, you did something wrong there actually, so you need to redo it. on the contrary, it's more like for us to learn, okay, they didn't do as it was foreseen that they would do related to the methodology and the process, so what we need to change so that that's obvious, sort of. And then in 1 year time, beginning of the first half of 2020, we will modify and consult on the suggested modifications so that we in 1 year time can launch the final version of levels. And then we will start to work at developing green public procurement criteria, which will then come out 1 year and a half later. And then we can start to use this as well into different kinds of initiatives that the Commission is working on, such as sustainable finance, which you may have heard of. Of course, in parallel with all this, we need to look at how do we make a useful tool. Right now, it's extremely rudimentary, and we are aware of that. For the final launch, then we need to have a user-friendly and a tool, and we need to see what kind of incentives in terms of technical work can we put in, can we manage from the Commission side to make it more attractive. But that's a parallel session, a parallel work stream, so to say. Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much, Josephina. So just while we wait for Pierre to load the next presentation, I wondered how many in the room are already familiar with levels at all? Few hands, yeah? Okay, really interesting, because so Josephina mentioned that architects are disproportionately represented in the conversation about levels, and it doesn't really come as a surprise to me because architects have long argued for a much broader perspective on sustainable design. And levels is actually the first scheme that's being put forward by the European Commission that's beginning to look at the performance of our building stock in terms of its environmental building, in terms of its environmental impact across a building's life cycle, and also looking at not just the resources that we consume, but what we make with them and how those buildings then end up performing. So I'm going to give you a little bit of background about why ACE has been so keen on levels, why we got involved, some of the background of our work, and give you a bit of a feedback about what the pilot has told us about architects' views about how levels could be used more broadly. So I'm sure many of you watch the news, and this is just a snapshot of a few recent events. In particular, in London, we have had Extinction Rebellion demonstrations shutting down the city, and there has been a total change in the pace of the discussion, and following the disruption to our lives, which was actually very, very welcome by most of the city. So they have been very peaceful, very human, and very friendly demonstrations that have actually managed to bring people together in a way we have not seen for actually, I have not seen that in pretty much my whole life. And there are things happening not just in Europe, but also beyond our borders. Even in the United States, people are beginning to talk about achieving net zero or 100% renewable energy targets by 2030. And within Europe, we are now seeing declarations to get to climate neutrality by 2030 in some of the northern countries, but also to 2050 by many of the European countries. And there is the news just out today that Germany is supporting the achieving climate neutrality in Europe by 2050. And there are a whole lot of other countries that have signed up and supported that. And when we talk about climate change, we tend to primarily worry about CO2 emissions. But actually, the status quo in terms of environmental impact is about 40% of energy is used in buildings in the UK, in the EU. 12% of water is used in buildings, and between 25 to 30% of all waste generated is from construction, and the raw material extraction, 50% of all raw materials extracted are for the purposes of construction. In terms of the economic status quo, the construction accounts for about 9% of all economic activity in the EU. Between 40 to 90% of all EU lending is in residential property, and over 90% of the 2050 building stock is already built. And this is very critical because we know in order to achieve the 2050 or 2035, 2040, 2030 goals, that means that the building renovation has about a 30-year life cycle. So the buildings that that have to operate as net zero by 2050, we are already renovating now. And that means that we have to do all our renovations already as net zero. So how are we going to do that, and what will be the incentives to make such an incredible rate of change in our built environment is going to be a big challenge. We know that government investment, for example, in the UK, where I have the figures for specifically, on average improve greenhouse gas emissions between 5 to 15%. So these are the renovations that focus only on energy efficiency. So energy efficiency on its own is not a huge value driver. But we spend about 90% of our time in buildings and 100% in the built environment. And we know also that architecture, it's an expression of culture, and it's also forming culture and forming debate, and it's a representation of how we organize our relationship with our environment and with life. And so architects bear a big responsibility. But at the same time, current environmental legislation is, in terms of building performance, is very much focusing on energy consumption. And even there, we have issues. This is a picture of a building where, from a country where thermal bridging is not regulated. And that's just showing that regulating thermal bridging is actually a good idea. In this case, it would be a very good idea to have thermal breaks in balconies, but I don't think it would have met the cost model for this particular building. But quality assurance in construction is an absolutely major challenge as far as we can see from the Architects Council perspective. And I'll speak a bit more about that. Our reliance on energy consuming systems is really growing, and they do offer in many cases, more flexibility. We can put between 50 to 100 people into a room like this and have cooling, make the climate bearable. We can also build buildings with very deep floor plates and less daylight and provide fresh air mechanically. And it does make a lot more profit in terms of real estate. However, we are not regulating the controls of these mechanical systems, and in the next round of EPBD, we are on our way to actually exempt quite a lot of buildings from inspections if they can demonstrate that they have specified smart building systems. So controls, as far as we can tell, is quite a big risk, and if you want to download ACE's report on our standpoint on the smart readiness indicator, one of the reasons why we are really pushing for greater quality control, in particular in the integration of mechanical systems and their controls in buildings, is because in the greater the complexity, technical complexity of buildings, and geometric and spatial complexity of buildings, the more likely there is that you're going to experience what we call a performance gap. More complication means a greater risk to performance. And in the UK, there have been quite a lot of studies done on measuring this gap between expected and achieved performance. It's a real shame for the way the politics are evolving in the UK. The UK was one of the most forward-looking countries to implement the EPBD, the Energy Performance of Buildings Directives, in the sense we were as far as I know, and please correct me if I'm wrong, we were the only ones to implement what they call the display energy certificates, which means that you don't just do an asset rating for a building, but you have to declare the operational performance of all public buildings above 500 square meters. And so this has increased the availability of data between expectations and outcomes, and as a result the government put a lot of investment into the research of the causes of this gap. We were seeing buildings that we designed ABC rated, coming out EFG rated in the operational cycle, and that's not okay, because that means that we're not investing in the right measures and we're not addressing the risks. And that's just in energy consumption. And in terms of one of the reasons for the underperformance of buildings, both in terms of material definitions and in energy, is the fragmentation of the building sector. Construction and design and construction is one of the most fragmented sectors that's there. And if you see the UK GBC, the UK Green Building Council, did a survey a couple of years ago, and I just highlighted the one line about functionality. Somehow, only tenants thought that the functionality of a building was important. And, well, that says a lot about the sector. So this notion of how we design buildings to perform and how we want them to perform kind of rings or brings up sometimes pictures of the Volkswagen Gate or the Dieselgate affair, and we sometimes wonder whether actually construction, whether this performance gap issue is construction's Dieselgate, because the amount of investment that's misdirected due to this discrepancy between asset ratings and achieved performance is really important. And it also undermines people's enthusiasm to adopt new legislation. I understand in the last session, people asked, why would we want another reporting scheme? And I really, really feel for everyone who feels that we are doing already enough auditing. And actually, there's a big debate about what type of auditing brings you the right results. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about that, if you can bear with me. So one of the reasons why we really need a scheme that looks at the whole life performance of buildings is that we have a tendency to transfer impacts to less reported areas. So that could be technical systems that are aiming to achieve regulatory compliance, but at the cost of higher maintenance costs downstream, or the cost of materials versus local sourcing, or the recycled content and recyclability. the loss of impact, the loss of floor area versus the environmental impact of insulation products. So if you use plastic insulation, you get greater usable floor area usually. The speed of erection versus the life versus the end of life disassembly of a building. More usable area versus less stratification and comfort. So, for example, we cannot build to the same floor-to-ceiling heights as we used to. You will see just a picture in Brussels looking at how many stories you build to the equivalent of the old floor-to-ceiling height. And this is not even a very new building. We will never be able to build at the same thermal mass and volumetric dimensions that we used to be able to 100 or so years ago. So we have assets there that sometimes we underrate their value because we are actually not measuring it. So architects are always very keen to look at a different way of measuring building performance. So not just from the perspective of energy, but also from the resources consumed to create the spaces and the configuring them and running them, and the comfort and well-being achieved with those resources, how resilient these buildings are to climate change, how adaptable they are, and what's their life cycle cost and value. So there is a huge, Josefina, no pressure whatsoever. There is a really big expectation from the architects that we have spoken to for levels to work, to become a system that can help us balance, help us first of all start measuring the right things, the right kind of impacts, and balance these so that we can build buildings that really truly perform measurably and significantly better. And the image you've all been waiting for, I'm sure, is the most exciting slide. It gives you a list of the indicators in levels. You can download this from the Commission's site, but you will see these are the main indicators: the greenhouse gas emissions, the material impact, water use, indoor environmental quality, climate change resilience, and cost and value. And so just starting with some of the feedback, everyone says we need more and better accountability in construction. And we need to audit, so we need to spend effort where it matters. And everyone wants to do less bean counting. And bean counting is counting things that don't really help. Nobody wants to do bean counting, but everybody loves doing schedules. Architects love doing schedules, and they love to automate that. They love to be able to balance capital cost with whole life cost, with environmental, want to know if I change the shape of a building, how is it going to change my energy consumption? This is a quick model we did about 10 years ago. And you can do a lot of automated scheduling. So scheduling and auditing is not really the problem. It's scheduling the things that nobody really thinks will make any difference to a project. So spending time in the right sort of way. So architects secretly love schedules. Benchmarking. So there's quite a lot of discussion about levels. Do we need another scheme with benchmarks? And I think the Commission's point is very clear that we don't need another rating scheme. And so the idea behind levels was not to develop a rating scheme, but to harmonize the metrics behind reporting, holistically reporting the performance of buildings. And what architects are telling us is they just want to know where their building is within a distribution. They want to see what other kind of buildings are similar to mine, and is my building doing better than the distribution in terms of material use, in terms of energy consumption, in terms of indoor environment, indoor air quality. So, and also we want to balance priorities. How do I know whether I'm for a particular project, for a particular type, for a site, for a particular client, am I balancing embodied versus operational carbon well? Do I go for thermal mass, or do I go for a lightweight structure, more compact, mechanically serviced? How do I balance that? And how can I argue for it with my project team and with my client if I haven't got the data and the rapid feedback that I need and the reporting framework that everyone understands to argue for that? How do I balance complexity versus quality risks if there is no metric to show that? Technological solutions versus lifespan. The lifespan of most mechanical systems is between 10 to 15 years. We, as architects, know that buildings that really last, we measure it in the hundreds. And expanding the lifespan of buildings really makes a lot of sense from a holistic perspective. The capital versus whole life cost, very difficult to argue for long-term solutions without actually being able to demonstrate the figures. Do we go for improving heat loss, maximizing the building fabric, or do we accept how much summertime overheating do we accept as a trade-off? So being able to design a building means that you need to be able to balance these trade-offs. And again, just a note about architecture. Sorry to keep bringing that up, the old A word. Most of this balancing happens right there. If you do the right amount of briefing up front, then that balancing can happen with the full buy-in of a design team. Further down the line, so once you have set targets, so what the feedback from the piloters want is we want a simple system that allows us to set targets really easily at briefing stage for clients to incorporate in their briefs. We want simple tools and some benchmarks to be able to estimate really early on a building's performance. And then as we have more detail and more data, we can then start optimizing between different solutions. And then we want to be able to incorporate these really simply in a contract, so the contractor can report on it back. And then pretty much the rest of it is just tracking and communication. Easy, right? But it's actually for the tracking and communication to work, you would have had to share a lot of information upfront and align the whole supply chain's goals and incentives towards that purpose. And this is what we need a simple framework for. We've done it on some other projects before, and Sven might mention that later on. And we need a system that we can access really easily. A lot of people also said we want better alignment between the different commissions, different initiatives. There's the Smart Readiness Indicator that I mentioned earlier. EPBD, next review is coming up in 2024, 25? Building passport, digital logbooks, which we need systems to support this kind of communication around data around building performance, construction products directives, eco-labels, indoor air quality initiative. So we need much better regulatory environment that takes this holistic perspective to environmental performance. Sorry about this one. When we try and regulate a sector, we always forget about the people. It's people who brief buildings, it's people who design them, it's people who build them, it's people who operate them, and it's people who occupy them. And I remember when the Commission first came out with the heating and cooling strategy, I nearly fell off my chair laughing because it actually said that people are an inconvenience for building performance. And you can see why that's not really our perspective. And so just yesterday, I was thinking, well, what we need maybe is instead of putting the value at the bottom of this list, we should reverse the hierarchy of the indicators and start with the value. And architects are quite notorious at not very systematically documenting the value that they create. So I wanted to show you a few examples where this barrier was really well overcome. So the Danish Architectural Chamber has some excellent case studies and also a very specific publication about supporting architects in gathering the right data. In this psychiatric institution, forced fixation was down 70%, medication was down 60%. Another example, for some reason I can't see the logos, but 25% more students joined this school with a 40% rise in exam completion. Life cycle costs were down in the sports center by about 80%. And suddenly, and here's the UN Sustainable Development Goals, we have been missing the format in which to discuss this kind of value creation. And we increasingly find that the UN Sustainable Development Goals give a much better framework for us to appreciate these values. And this is a study created by the several Danish architecture chambers plus the UIA on the 17 Sustainable Development Goals. And the Architects and the RIBA, the Royal Institute of British Architects in the UK, has now declared a climate emergency and also put in a big report to the RIBA Council about what the profession needs to do to be able to facilitate meeting those goals and incorporate them in the delivery of architectural education and supporting the profession. And I really highly recommend both of those reports. And this is the document produced by the Danish Danish Association of Architects by Lena and Peter Andreas, who unfortunately can't be here today. Architect, document your value creation. So in conclusion, all we are trying to do is to close the feedback loop. So what we set out to do, whether it's an indoor environmental quality, whether it's contribution to a local neighborhood, whether it's resource consumption, we are able to understand how well we have done. We need to make some very big changes. If we don't use that feedback, how are we going to improve our processes? We need to really, these are my RT slides, we need to go from a static dominance of our environment to a much more symbiotic relationship with nature. And architecture and design are the tools to be able to deliver them. Thank you very much. So I hope I managed to give some food for thought to the audience. And if you could please, all speakers and panel debate contributors, come and take your seats. And mics. I'm going to ask each panel member to take a few minutes just to introduce yourselves. Esmand, would you like to start?
Hello everyone, my name is Sven Berman. I'm a lecturer at UCL Institute for Environmental Design and Engineering, a lecturer in building performance. I'm not an architect by background. I'm a mechanical engineer, MEP designer before joining UCL as a researcher. So I used to work with the architects as a building services design engineer, and now we carry out multidisciplinary research in the area of built environment. And my interest from Levels projects stems from the fact that we started a collaborative research project with Tsinghua University a few years ago around the idea of the so-called total performance, or rather total performance gap. As Judith mentioned in her presentation, we have been preoccupied with energy performance throughout the past years after the inception of the Energy Performance of Buildings Directive in the EU, but very increasingly we have seen potential conflicts between design measures that intend to improve energy efficiency and other performance metrics, notably indoor environmental quality, indoor air quality, and so on and so forth. And this was basically the starting point of that collaboration between Tsinghua and UCL to address the issue of total performance gap, taking energy as the input to the environmental system of a building and indoor environmental quality as the output. So we try to extend the definition of performance gap and total performance from energy to other metrics. And Levels actually fitted that narrative very well, so we decided to test the levels, various levels, level 1 to level 3, in one of our pilot studies in the UK, which is quite interesting as an exemplar building that has attempted to achieve the best operational rating available in the market. Again, going back to Judith's presentation, usually the metric used for most projects is asset rating. Very few projects have attempted to achieve certain level of operational rating, but this building attempted to get that energy rating in practice based on actual energy data. For that reason, it was a very good case study for us to evaluate the effectiveness of energy efficiency measures, but also the potential conflicts and interdependencies between energy and other performance metrics covered by level. Thank you.
My name is Markus Müller. I'm the president of the Architectural Chamber of Baden-Württemberg. We have 25,000 architects there, and am the head of one work group in the German Chamber of Architects. And have an own office in urban planning and classical architectural themes as hospitality, social buildings and leisure. And one of the central topics of our chambers are that good architecture is, or sustainable architecture is not necessarily good architecture, but good architecture is never not sustainable. And to come closer in these questions between sustainability and the high complexity of buildings and the additional complexity of sustainability to questions of design is one of the things we work on actually and discuss very much with the DGNB about such things in their measuring system. The question, what is good architecture possible to measure in such systems? That's the one thing. The other is the fact that 90% of the architects, it's really funny that in your talk it was exactly opposite, that 10% of the people which tested levels had never contact to such systems. And most of the architects in Germany don't do their measuring on their own. But they have experts from outside, as my office. And one of the main questions is it necessarily, or is it necessary that every office and every architect has to use such systems? Or is it necessary that in every project you have such systems as an embedded part of the project? And that is very different. So that's one of the questions I would discuss.
I know Anna has some strong views on that as well.
Yeah, but first to introduce myself, I'm Anna Braune. I'm from the German Sustainable Building Council, also known as DGNB. We have an own certification scheme. We have an academy training people in sustainability aspects. As head of research and development, I'm responsible for the scheme development, but also for research projects. And when levels came up, it was sort of clear that it landed on my desk. I helped also a little bit, in the development, I would say, and tried to give our feedback on what works good and what doesn't work very good. Sometimes I was heard, sometimes I was not heard. But at the end, when I look at the levels beta version now, it reassured our choice of indicators. We have many more indicators in the DGNB scheme because it has I would say, a broader perspective as well. But on the other hand side, the levels indicators fit like very, very well to what we're doing since 10, 12 years, and they also reflect the important aspects, but others are missing. But anyways, so that was one of the outcomes. It was also a little bit inspiring for our own development, and it was I think all the discussion around levels also brought the different European stakeholders and especially the scheme developers on several tables, but together on a table, and we discuss now much more frankly, much more open how to move forward I would say the European strategy, not so much in searching for unique selling points of the several schemes, but much more on finding the common denominators. And I'm supporting testers. In Germany, you have seen the numbers. There are not too many. The interest is not so high, although as DGNB we have incorporated the reporting indicators into our latest version. But maybe one of the reasons also where, what do I do this for? And maybe it's a little bit a question of who pays at the end for the assessment and what do I get for this. And so if people start doing it, then at the end they say, okay, we want to have the sign, so we go for DGNB and a little bit of, we're doing this levels thing anyways. But so that was maybe a little bit the feedback. We have some points that Josefina also knows that to unfold the potential of levels, I think some adjustments would be needed. But the idea to have a not so much a reporting tool, but to use this reporting tool as a dialogue and decision support tool, that is the super strength of getting numbers out of something and using the numbers to declare that the concept, the principle, the design concepts that the team has chosen are good, because the indicators are nothing else but to reassure a good architectural, mechanical, engineering, whatsoever design. So first comes the design, and the numbers can reassure.
Yeah, my name is Brian. I'm from Denmark, a company called Årstiden Arkitekter, and I work as an architect and have done some DGNB, so I know a part of it. As a background, I work mostly with apartments, both new apartments and renovation. And renovation is maybe a part I've talked with some colleagues about missing in levels. But I've seen there was plenty of renovation projects, but we don't have any in Denmark right now. I'm working right now with 2 DGNB projects. So that's, in my opinion, a good way to look at sustainability, but levels could be a good way to start it. DGNB is a high level, many hours. Levels could be an easy way to start talking about it, and I think that's the good part of it. And I've tested 1 project at levels. I think I'm the only one testing in this panel.
Yeah, I'll take yours because I'm sure it works. Just to say, well, first of all, I'm not an architect. I'm a chemical engineer, but I hope that doesn't disqualify me from being here. I just want to say, perhaps, when I realized that the room is not full of levels experts, and that doesn't disqualify you from being here either, by the way. I just wanted to make sure that people have it clear in their minds that levels is not a rating scheme. I mean, for the time being, it's nothing because we haven't launched it yet. But the intention with levels and the way it has been developed and tested, for that matter, is that it will not be a rating scheme. We're not intending to set benchmarks, European benchmarks as such. But what we wanted to do was to group a number of indicators which look at the full life cycle of buildings so that we are sure that we're not missing out something. I mean, there are always trade-offs between different resource uses and different aspects, and we wanted to in a relatively easy way group the most important aspects but make sure that we are not ending up with too many indicators. At the same time, when we started this work, we thought that we would be looking only at resource use and the environmental impacts that they have. But we were very quickly, stakeholders made it clear to us that we had to include something about the quality and the value of the building as well. Otherwise, it wouldn't be very interesting for many people. So that's where we also ended up having. So first of all, we have something on energy. We have something life cycle energy. We have materials and we have water. That's what we thought we would start with. But we very quickly then added health and comfort, resilience to climate change, and life cycle costing value. So those are the 6 areas which levels cover. And the idea is, as I said, to be able to, we try to sell ourselves as having a common language, provide a common language, which other initiatives which are indeed assessing and rating buildings, they can use this common language in their different initiatives. That would be the plan. Now, new or other feedback from the testers start to come in. As I said, we are expecting this by the 30th of June, but some have already started to report. So now I start to get lots of very interesting comments about what would be the necessary modifications, and perhaps not just small modifications in an indicator or two, but really looking at the structure of it as well, and how it could be slightly modified to make it more useful. So this is something, as I had put up on my slide in the beginning, we will spend this coming year to look at what are the modifications we need to do, and also consult on those ideas that we will get, and then hopefully have something ready for next year. I mean, in 1 year's time. Yeah.
Thanks, everyone. Are there any questions already from the audience? Yes, please. Could you say your name? And
so my name is Johan Xing. I'm from CSTB France. So we participated also in levels, of course. So you informed us that in 2020, 21, and in 21, there will be something about green public procurement criteria, and also something about sustainable finance initiative. I just wanted to know what will be the status of these documents. Is this something voluntary? It is something recommendation? And then, for example, I imagine the answer for the first point. For the second point, for example, for this sustainable finance initiative, is it related to the big European banks, for example? That as it is in Germany, for example, they have the German National Development Bank, KfW, and they linked it to some certification scheme in Germany. Will it be the same for the big European banks?
Yes, so for the green public procurement criteria, there already exist European green public procurement criteria for office buildings, but we intend to revise those based on the levels indicators. That would make sense, we think. So once we have the levels framework ready with its indicators, we will look at the how we would modify the existing green public procurement criteria. Now, the EU ones. The EU ones exist as an example, as inspiration for public authorities in Europe to use. They can, of course, they can choose to not do green public procurement at all. They can choose to do it, but in a different way, and choose indicators that they want. I mean, it's, as you know, it's totally voluntary. But we do think that it's important that the work that we are doing ourselves within the Commission, that it is coherent, you know. And it is, once we have the green public procurement criteria. I mean, I started off by saying that levels will not set European benchmarks, and that is clear. But if we are developing green public procurement criteria based on levels, then obviously we will have to put forward some suggested benchmarks as well. That's what those kind of criteria look like. And that would allow us, as the Commission, to use those criteria in different kinds of EU policy where we see they would fit. Again, they would be voluntary. I cannot promise you that they will be voluntary forever. I hope not, personally. But I mean, in the coming years, for sure, these are voluntary tools. We could see, for example, how we could use it in our own public procurement as well. And if we are funding building projects through the structural funds and regional funds, then it would be handy to have those kinds of criteria. That's how we would see it. But it is not something that we put forward as legislation. Mm.
But then the second is, then it is mandatory. It means when you link it to a structural funds,
yes,
then it becomes mandatory. Then it becomes mandatory.
Yes, indeed.
And that is a very powerful tool.
Yes.
Then it means that you have European money if you use European indicators.
Yes, indeed, indeed. You're right. I mean, that is what happens now because there are already criteria linked to energy efficiency, of course. So there we would, I mean, if you are funding a project, a building project somewhere in Europe with regional funds, you typically have requirements on the energy efficiency.
Related to national.
Yes, indeed. Yeah.
Not to European.
No, exactly. And there I would assume that we would move in the same direction with the levels indicators. And I would be very surprised if we were to use the full set of indicators. Judith showed a graph with about 10 or a slide with about 10 indicators. We would probably have to look at what would be the most important ones to go ahead with, and at what rate, at what speed would we do that. But it would be strange if the Commission did not itself start to look at how can we use those different indicators in different kinds of policies, I think.
Great.
And in the sustainable finance as well, sorry. In the sustainable finance you asked about as well. I must confess that I don't know exactly how that work would function. It is indeed another part of the Commission which is responsible for that, the policy development around it. But DG Environment is very much involved in developing a kind of a taxonomy in different sectors, and building is one of those sectors.
Any other questions from the audience just now? Yes, Yves?
In fact, it's not really a question, it's much more a reaction. Thank you, Judith, for bringing the discussion on the big picture. I mean, I think the problem and maybe the solution are with the Sustainable Development Goals, because the problem is not the choice. I mean, we're talking about criteria. The problem is not the choice between two systems of heating system or which one will be better. The question is global warming, even in Paris or in Brussels. What will be the weather in a few decades? When are we going to start talking about the heating island, urban farming, and so on? You know, are we sure that within a few decades we'll be able to live in Brussels or Paris? That's, I mean, talking about the criteria, we have to go to the big picture you were mentioning with the UN and UIA targets and goals, because that's really where the problem is. We are now 7 billion people, soon 8. We know that the planet can only afford 8, and we are almost sure we're going to rise to 8, 9, 10, 11 billion. So the problem is not really the choice between two systems, two mechanical systems, but what will be the planet in a few decades, not in century, only in a few years, and how architects with their advices can, I mean, try to put the find the solution. You know, in Paris, you know, we talking about social housing. We found out that those big slabs from the 60s, you know, they can become urban farming surfaces, and all those locals, common social rooms, you know, they used to be, and all the owners, you know, wanted to shut them because it was really a problem. They are now trying to opening them back for the people to gather and live together and connect. So I think the architects have to play a part in that play, and UAA and ACE will be part of the writing.
Can I ask how many architects and engineers are in the room? Could you put your hand up for me? Whoa. Okay, so how many? Who is not an architect or an engineer? Great. And are you from? Who is from NGOs? Other NGOs and government? Few. Very interesting. And how many engineers? I'm always very proud when I manage to chair anything where 50% of the room is architects and 50% of engineers, because it's always a fantastic sign, because somehow we have to solve these solutions between the silos.
Teamwork.
And we're very keen to bring also different efforts from different ministries together to solve some of the pertinent issues of the times. But going back to the panel again, how would you respond to what Yves was talking about, and what's the role of levels in architecture?
I wanted to ask the question, what's the role of level in your mind in the legislation of the European Union? Because if I see the danger if it's really voluntary and not really broad spread, nobody will use that tool. But the chance is, if it's a planning tool in early phases of planning, similar to cost planning, where you don't know many details of your project, but have some benchmarks, as you told, it would be worth to be used. So there are several really sensible ideas in your project, but nobody really understands what's the practical worth of it. Because we have the DGNB, we have some other partners with which we work. So probably the right idea is to have funding and some way how the costs are financed. Because then you can argue with you or talk with your customers and say you have a value from this process.
Yes, sorry, I was certainly not laughing at your question. It was a very good question. Yes, I think that the idea from the beginning was to not start off by developing levels as a mandatory legislative tool from the outset. Now, actually, back in 2013, we had a public consultation. That was before we started to develop levels. We had a public consultation on what did the sector think would be the best thing to do, basically. And I remind you that was before we started to develop it, so it was not that they could sort of look at it and see how would we use this. But we were talking about developing a framework of indicators. And it was very clear that, yes, of course, the most efficient way would be to have a mandatory thing obviously. Not surprising, I would have been surprised if the result had been different. But they also said the sector is not, that was back in 2013, the sector is not ready to have this sort of put on them right away with loads of 10 or so indicators covering the full life cycle directly. You would have to have to use a stepwise approach and take it step by step, whether it's sort of indicator by indicator, or first of all introducing or provide a tool that can be used, and then start to link incentives to it, and then when you see which ones are the most indicators which are mostly used and which consider are the best by the sector itself, then start to legislate. So we sort of to take a quite a cautious approach, but still at an early stage being able to provide the direction of it. Now exactly what will that roadmap look like? I don't know, because we are about to finish the test phase. We will have to look at what will be the final outcome of it, and then I have to talk to the new political masters, which will come in relatively soon, in half a year or so, or a couple of months. So I don't know exactly what that process will look like. What I know for sure is the process that I just mentioned, with green public procurement criteria, with sustainable finance. I can think of other aspects as well, other different kinds of European policies on a voluntary basis where we can start to use levels. There is work, of course, as you know, on design for deconstruction. That's something that our colleagues in DG GROW are working on. Yes, their levels feeds indirectly to that work. They are also looking at a digital logbook. Again, levels would feed indirectly to that. I mean, a logbook would cover many more things than the sustainability aspects that levels is looking at, but for one part of it, indeed, levels would feed in right away. And there are many others as well. There is, I think Judith mentioned, smart readiness indicators. There we are also looking at how can we actually combine this in an intelligent way. I take your point that if we just leave this totally voluntary, then of course it will not have the same uptake as if we pushed it through. But I think we need to be, we can't scare off people. At the same time, we should put strong enough incentives so that we can see this change. Now, you say we already have tools. We have DGNB, and there are other tools as well, of course. Of course there are. But we would like, you don't happen to have the nice bubbles that Peter Andreas, no. And I cannot draw here on the wall, no, will not be appreciated.
I can describe them.
You can describe them, yeah. So in any case, what we are looking at is not to, we're not competing, we're not trying to replace those big tools on the market for many reasons. First of all, because you do an excellent job, we wouldn't have a chance to try to do that. But secondly, that's not what is needed. As we heard from down there, it's not about which tool is better than the other one. I think that Anna can quite well describe that there is an interest from those different tools to be comparable on certain number of indicators, and that is, and they actually came, not Anna herself, but other representatives from those bigger schemes. They came, I think it was back in 2012-13, to visit us, and they said we would like to be comparable on certain number of indicators, and we would like you to help us in seeing what could that be. But I think so. For us, it's very important that those big schemes and smaller schemes start to apply some of the levels indicators. I think that would be a great push on the market. But it is also important for us that, for example, small regional and local green public or public procurers start to apply levels indicators, even if they're not doing a full-fledged commercial certification out of it. And it is also so that we want to try, I mean, our aim is to try to lift the market gradually. Oh, I would like to lift it super fast, but that's not going to happen. So the aim will have to be to lift the market gradually, so that we start to mainstream this kind of life cycle thinking. It's not going to happen with the big schemes that we have today, I think, because they are, well, Anna can tell me if I'm right or not, but most of those schemes, at least, they are not targeting the mainstream market. They have their different target groups, right?
But do you think that's because they're voluntary, and this is the only scheme that's got any hope of becoming mandatory?
Are you asking me?
Yeah.
Well, I think, I mean, then we can hear from the testers if we have succeeded or not. But the idea, at least with levels, was that we would provide something which would be easier to work with. Now, obviously, if you compare working with DGNB, which has been up and running and has its full-fledged back office, so to say, of course it's easier than picking up the spreadsheet of levels today. Huh? But the way we would like to see levels being used, we wanted to provide this intermediate between doing nothing apart from compliance with regulation and the DGNB gold or whatever it's called, plus platinum. I'm sorry. Oh yeah, right. and have something in between which can still be possible for many more building projects to work with and lift it gradually.
Anna first and then Brian, sorry.
So I don't want to talk too much about DGNB because we're of course aiming the mainstream market. So I want every building to be DGNB certified. No, but actually what we have to think about what we're doing here with this sustainability thing. DGNB, Aschko, the BRE, we are working constantly to include aspects into decision makers, so investors, thinking that they don't see any value for. There is no value in buying a direct value in buying FSC or PEFC certified wood instead of non-certified wood. There is no direct return on invest. There is no direct value in lowering carbon emissions of a building. There is no direct value in buying materials that can be recycled after they have sold the building and so on. So we are constantly working since decades now on providing incentives to invest different without getting a value but a badge on the wall. That's what they are thinking. What we sell is quality, and what we sell is well-designed buildings, flexible, adaptable, recyclable, low emissions, healthy, no impacts for the people inside, no impacts for the people outside. And so actually the typical building project is you get a specific amount of money and the client says, give me something for this, and at the end it's more. So in the midnight hour, more. So I think you all wake up in the midnight hour because the client wants more, and wants to pay less. And this is feasible in our world with a free market, with unregulated allowances to pollute the environment and to harass people who are not affected. For example, users of a building or people outside Europe, because we're importing materials, they are cheaper, less, more space, but nobody wants to pay at the end for the environmental damages or the health damages that other people, none as the client, has to affect. And now we're looking for policies and instruments to finally, because the eyes got open, and now we see there's 9 billion people who also want this comfort and this more, and this will not work because we don't have enough actually regulation in this field. And we are doing a lot of also political lobbying in raising the bar, and not just gradually, but really lifting the bar. And I can talk about Germany, and this is really like getting tears into my eyes. So it is so difficult to move politically towards, let's say, maybe the lift it a little bit. This is already quite difficult. And my hope with levels is, for example, that that this tool can, and the experience of all those who have used similar indicators such as ASHCO, BREEAM, DGNB, and whatever incentive tool that is similar to what levels is doing, and to assure political decision makers to either bind it to funding, permits, or whatsoever, because there is experience in going into the right direction. And the thing is, if you always ask for the value and what do you get out of it, as long as we don't have a carbon price, as long as the environmental impacts are not accounted, as long as you can harass people with chemicals in products without getting sued for that, nothing will change. So I'm sorry for this. So Josefina, I'm totally backing you up. And we as certification body, we also hope for politics to raise the bar, because we are front runners always, but we hope that our front running also encourages political decision makers to move the bar, to raise the bar.
Brian, please. Clap. It's okay.
In my opinion, levels should be the common language about sustainability, not all the DGNB stuff, technical parts, lots of criteria and so on, but a way to talk about it. Then we could decide afterwards, do I want to do a DGNB or LEED, BREEAM, what they're called, instead of just they're putting a lot of numbers on. But I think levels could, with some adjustments of course, I don't think it's done right now.
Brian, you need to speak into the microphone.
Okay. I think it's need a turn again, but I think it's a good way to talk about it. And there's only a few topics instead of 30 topics. It's 6 right now.
Anyone wants to contribute from the... Audrey, go for it.
Hi, I'm Audrey Nugent from the World Green Building Council. So our network of green building councils have really been involved in the development and evolution of levels over the last number of years. And I just wanted to add a reflection on some of the conversations you guys have been having about its potential evolution into a mandatory scheme. Because just yesterday we had a sort of visioning workshop for levels where some of us discussed, should levels actually become the sustainable performance of buildings directive in the same way that the energy performance of buildings directive exists? Should actually we support its evolution to that? And if so, what does a roadmap look like in terms of developing that? I think what's really important in terms of achieving that, if that's where we want to go, is this sort of cross-sector collaboration and having these conversations. But it'd be just interesting to get some reflections from the panel on that sort of evolution and how you see that might work.
Marcus?
We have many legislations, and I think if it was a frame for and it's mandatory that you have to fulfill sustainability schemes, then I think it would be a broader basis for all. And then in the next step, it's the question who pays. And as Anna said, we need a carbon tax or some price for pollution. And then we have, as the guy said, we have our development bank in Germany, which provides money for buildings with higher standards. And I think it's necessary because your work is really great. And to have common European standards, I think it makes really sense. So, if we have the basis which says we have a legislation, I have to do this as a client of an architect. It's not necessary that we talk to them and convince them of being good people and I don't know what. As Anna described, it's our reality. So it was much easier, and it would create a workflow where you say you have to do this and that and that and that, and it isn't allowed to cost too much, the whole project, and it has to be finished in a special time, and it has to be sustainable, and it would make much easier. But we all are not politics, we are experts in any context, but we should say, don't be afraid of legislation. And the next would be that it has to be your decision in which, with which partner you do it, if DGNB or anything else, and in which level. Maybe you get more money if you have a higher standard and get less money if you do just levels. But as our times are as they are, it is necessary to have the legislation aspect.
Can I ask Sven the question on that? Or you go ahead.
I just had a comment before then, if I may. I think first and foremost, we should take the levels framework as it is, as it's intended to be, as a common language for sustainability. Just to give the audience one simple example of how levels, in my mind, could be transformational, for example, in the market. It's potential to define advanced benchmarks. So we have different assessment levels under the levels framework. Level 2 is about comparative assessments, which opens the door for benchmarking. So it's not about benchmarking per se, it's about the specification of data that you need to provide when you want to share data with others, when you want to upload your data into public domain, the basis for sampling, the accuracy of measurements, time representativeness, space representativeness, and these details. And those of you who have worked with data, I'm sure agree with me, it's important to understand the context when you want to compare and contrast data extracted or collected from one building, from one context with another building. And we don't have this information. We have plenty of data, and all of us these days talk about big data. This information is out there, but we lack that context. We lack that common language. And levels could enable us to basically use the same language when exchanging data, and then we would be able to use this data. Just to give you a very simple example of what benchmarking can do and where we lack, in my mind, I think, at least based on my limited experience in the UK and also some experience in the EU context, I think we are not that good in benchmarking, in building benchmarking. I'll give you one example in terms of energy benchmarks, but please bear in mind that levels goes well beyond energy. It's not limited to energy, so we would be able to extend it to other domains. But in terms of energy, traditionally, we use very simple proxies to define benchmarks for buildings. Effectively, as far as the UK case is concerned, and also most other European countries, to the best of my knowledge, is building type and the gross floor area. So if you give me what building you're dealing with, school, for example, a secondary school, what is the gross floor area? I would be able to give you a typical and good practice benchmark from the UK context, and we do benchmarking on that basis. Now, there was an interesting exchange in the previous session about the use of Energy Plus, a US-based simulation engine in the context of energy certification in the EU. I quite enjoyed that. Let me bring back that issue in terms of benchmarking. I'll give you an example of an advanced benchmarking methodology in the USA, which is Energy Star. Very briefly, what Energy Star does, it tries to extract further information from buildings to be able to develop advanced and context-oriented benchmarks for energy. Because if I'm going to benchmark an office building with another office building, compare an office building with another office building with different functionalities, different use of ICT equipment, different occupancy patterns, I can't apply the same benchmark based on simple proxies like type and gross floor area. I need further information. So what they do in the context of Energy Star, they have a centrally administered, basically, data gathering team. Every few years, they go back to a number of buildings, a couple of hundred buildings in each sector, schools, offices, other type of buildings, to gather certain information about various building characteristics. Okay, ventilation strategy, whether or not they have air conditioning, how many chillers do they have, occupancy pattern, number of computers. In addition to, of course, building type, gross floor area, that information is granted, and then they do statistical analysis to derive advanced benchmarks. Okay, now I'll give you one example of the information we have in the EU. We are talking about a couple of hundred buildings per sector in the United States, and the outcome is Energy Star. Whoever has used Energy Star, I'm sure would agree with me, is far advanced than the benchmarks we use here. But take energy certification schemes in the EU. We have millions of energy certificates already lodged in various member states in the EU. What do you get as input data in the files that are used to generate EPC? You have detailed information about building systems, about building zones. Based on building fabric characteristics and air permeabilities, you can infer the age of the buildings. Okay, we have very good building characteristics that we never use or have used to develop such benchmarks because we don't have access to that data. We are not very good in sharing data, in data specification, in specifying a common language, basically, to facilitate the exchange of data and data analysis. Just to compare the numbers, millions, without exaggeration, millions of energy certification and few hundred of buildings, a relatively small statistical sample in the United States, but we still don't have this type of advanced and context-oriented benchmarks in the EU. And I think levels as a common language could facilitate basically development of such benchmarks, going back to my earlier point, not only related to energy, but far beyond energy in terms of thermal comfort, for example, in terms of life cycle assessment, overheating, risk of overheating against future climate change, and so on and so forth. So I can see big potential there. And first and foremost, again, this is a language to communicate and to exchange data and to specify data. I think on its own right, this is a major step in the right direction, but of course could be streamlined, could be linked to sustainability and green building rating systems, to smart readiness indicator, and so on and so forth, by all means. But even at this current state, I think it's great, and I can see, a huge potential in it.
So Anna, do you think the revolution needs to start amongst the certification schemes?
Of course, I mean, we are the front runners, and but sorry, I have to talk about benchmarks. We have had the 4th hottest year in a row. We know that plus energy buildings are feasible. We know that with plus energy buildings, which produce energy that has a lower carbon impact than the surrounding grid, we do good. We know that we save money with it. So a plus energy building has €0 operational energy cost. We know we can save water, we can recycle water, we know we can build to deconstruct so that the value that has been created can be a value for its second use or third or fourth. We do have the benchmarks. We know 0 or plus is a super duper benchmark, and you said it, the 90% of the 2050 building stock is existing. Every renovation, everything that we do from today off will stand in 2050 as it is today. So benchmarking is, from my perspective, I'm sorry to say this, we have a lot of benchmarks in DGNB scheme, but with the urge of the situation that in which we are today, being, a bit better than the neighbors is just to give you a good feeling, but you did not maybe receive anything good. So the benchmarks could be very courageous, very maybe in 2 too far away for many. But just to give a good feeling that you're, 10% or 15% better than the average, I don't know if this is the right direction that we have to go. And I would definitely vote for example, giving sort of the target values and maybe a figure that is in 2030, in 10 years' time. And then you achieve much more than just saying, this is where you are today, and this might be interesting to compare. But I'm pretty sure that the target values are more important than the current benchmarks today. So this is my position on benchmarking. And I think that with this respect, levels, I know that maybe it does not fit then to financing and today's situation, and then you want to do, those who do a bit better, you want to give them an incentive, which could be, whatever, some financial help or even a permit or so, whatever. But on the other hand, I don't know if we lose too much time to develop a broad and accepted benchmark database which includes all the information that is needed to treat everybody fair.
Come back very quickly. You carry on.
I love Anna Braune very much. No, everything is true what you say, but we live in a real world, and it's absolutely necessary under several aspects to have these informations from which you talked. One of them is that we have convinced our customers that it makes sense to do things better. The second is when we talk about carbon tax, one of the aspects is what is the most effective way to save carbon. And I'm not sure if it's the most effective way and the cheapest way for in a worldwide perspective to save carbon with plus energy buildings. Maybe, I don't know, we need benchmarks. So one of the reasons why it makes or to focus on this aspect of levels is that we have to learn very much in the daily architectural work about the effectiveness of things and of the effectiveness at different places. In Portugal, maybe the sun shines more than in the UK. I don't know. So we have to find ways how we can or have smart reasons why we build here in this way and somewhere else in another way. And I think we can learn very much about ways of designing at several places.
Sven, just briefly, and then just to be able to answer that.
If I could, very quickly, I take your point, Anna, regarding benchmarks. We have plenty of benchmarks. It's both a matter of accuracy, the relevance to context, so on and so forth. Again, purely based on my experience in the UK. I'm sure your benchmarks are more advanced. But in the UK, one of the problems we had in terms of implementation of energy performance of building directive, you did mention that we have a display energy certificate, which is based on operational data. Okay, it's based on actual energy use of a building, which is great. The benchmarks used within this certification scheme are the traditional benchmarks that I just mentioned, based on the type of the building and gross floor area. So that's the only information we have in terms of statistical sample, and based on that we derive benchmarks that underpin this scheme. Now, there were calls a few years ago, Judith is well aware of that, to extend applicability of DEC from public buildings, which was required in the context of EPBD, to private sector as good practice. Okay, so not necessarily not confined to public building, but also commercial offices should possess a display energy certificate, put it, in the reception in a visible place so that people can understand how efficient their building is. The main objection And I have to say, as an academic who tries to be neutral and objective, I think a valid objection, okay, from business was, look, you can't use the same benchmark you apply to office buildings, public sector office buildings, to a commercial office building with varying needs, pattern of occupancy, functionalities, the level of equipment we use in the City of London in banking sector, for example. They were against this. And you couldn't argue with that. I can understand they have other motivations as well. But purely on scientific basis, they did have a valid point. The benchmarks are not quite there to distinguish a building with light operation, an office building with rather light operation, with a office building with heavy operation, plenty of equipment, and so on and so forth. That type of benchmarking, advanced benchmarking, and that level of information enables us to refine our existing benchmarks. That's all. We have plenty of benchmarks. There's room for improvement. That was basically what I'm trying to.
Brian and then Eve. Please put your hands up if you just give me a sign if you want to ask a question, so I can also give the.
For an architect, benchmarks is just kind of bullshit, because what's how to measure architecture, how to measure the atrium outside this room. That's it's difficult to put a number on. Is it good? Is it bad? Is it an 8 or is it 2? So that's really what I need and miss in levels. The architectural things, daylight, we have them in DGNB. Maybe they can be even more soft. The green parts, how you feel the room, how it is to be inside. So, of course, engineers, architects, developers, and so on develop the world together. But the minds, the most crazy minds are in the architects. So if we have to develop, then we need not only to look at some numbers. Numbers is not developing projects, in my opinion, in the beginning. Of course, you can see it. Is it getting better? Is it getting worse? But you have to start somewhere else than numbers.
But do you think, Brian, that we are now living in a different time? We really have to make factual improvements to our relationship to the environment. Yeah. And so that I think the question is Level's role in that. So I don't think anyone's questioning the qualitative benefit of architecture, but how can we continue to create qualitatively amazing built environment, but measurably using less resources and having less of an impact on the environment? Yeah, and that's the hard part about an architecture. You can measure architecture. That's kind of a feeling. In DGNB, you have the diamond system. It's in the beginning, but it's still difficult how to measure it. It's more an technical engineering way to sum up. There is a number, a conclusion. What is architecture? That's only a conclusion. If one company did one building, but another company could do another building in the same competition, that's how each eyes are seeing the site, the project, the clients, and so on. Thank you. So Eve, and then the lady in the black and white dress.
Yes, talking about benchmarking and also talking about communication. I met people from the Green Flex project in Amsterdam, and I mean it's a very cool program. When you enter the program, they say that you don't pay anything. You will get the money back from the result of the economy in terms of energy and so on. It will last for 1 week to 1 month, independent of the volume of the building. And you will get to a zero energy building. And I mean, like everybody here, I'm a professional. I want to be reasonable. I know we are talking about public money. So I raised the question, are you sure you can make a zero energy building? And he told me, Eve, forget about it. Nobody understands 15 kilowatts per square meter per year. Zero. Everybody understand. I think that's part of the question we have to solve, you know, in terms also of communication. Don't we lose energy in the step-by-step process? And as you told, we know we can do it. I mean, we can do it roughly. We can do better. In France, you know, we checked all the building, the rehabilitation. About 1/3 is perfectly on the target. 1/3 is below. 1/3 is upper. So it's not too bad. The problem is when. When are we going to do that? The sooner the better.
Would you just say your name, please, and?
My name is Hannah Diaz. I'm an architect. I qualified as a lead accredited professional. Just one last quick question. We've just heard in the session 1 that it's quite difficult to apply like one rating system made in one country to, let's say, a country in Southern Europe because of like different constraints, different climate zones. So my question is just how does levels react to different regional constraints, and is this something you have had as a feedback in your early, you're not yet in the evaluation period, but is this something you're already facing at the moment?
It is something that we thought a lot about when we developed levels, for sure. So that was very sort of high up on the agenda. But as you said, we are still waiting for the results to come in. So I don't have a good overview of that. In a few months, I will, hopefully. But I don't know yet if there are any particular problems, issues, which have sort of come up in certain parts of Europe or in certain countries because of the way they report there according to legislation, or even regional aspects can have an impact potentially. But that I cannot say yet. I don't know, simply.
So any final questions from the audience? Céline? And can you put your hands up if you also want to ask something? So we have 2 more minutes for questions.
Yes, Céline Carré with Saint-Gobain. In the slide that you showed from the early feedback from the pilots, you mentioned that 90% of the tests are actually checking the global warming potential, even though it was not obligatory. What could we conclude from that? I mean, is that one of the obvious steps forward also when thinking about regulation? Thanks.
Yes. Well, first of all, I should say that was not as a feedback from the test phase. That was an information that we had from the registration. So when testers registered their interest in testing levels, or not just their interest, but their commitment to test levels, they also had to fill in basically which indicators will this project be looking into. So that information comes from there. The 90% comes from there. Then, of course, we have to see how many of those indicators that projects said they would be looking at, did they in the end look at? Did that change a lot or not? So that's also going to tell us something. But apart from that, I think just the fact that they committed to look at it, and maybe they also did. I mean, I don't think it's going to change that much. The commitment was very high to test that indicator, the whole life carbon, basically. And I think that's something which is when we started to work on this back in 2011, there was very little interest and understanding for this, apart from obvious but small groups, of course. But I think now, today, when you talk about embodied carbon in the sector, there is a clear understanding of it, or much higher than it used to be. We can see how some member states are moving forward on that topic, in that area, also in their legislation. I use a number every now and then to exemplify what it could look like. Finland, the Finnish minister or the Finnish government is looking to include whole life carbon in their legislation, the building regulation, and they made an impact assessment to see how important would that be? What kind of energy savings would they get? And they saw that if they did that, they expect to save so much that it would be, how do you say, it would be the same as 10% of their missing pledge to 2030. It would represent, was the word I was looking for, yeah. It represents as much as 10% of their missing pledge for 2030. So it's a big number. So they don't just see it as building regulation, they see it as a part of their climate policy, actually. And I think I could expect that it would look relatively similar in many member states. So I think if I look ahead, of course I don't know what the new commission and the parliament and the different member states governments will want to do exactly and at what pace. I do think that looking at levels, I think that the whole life carbon part is a very important part, which simply because of the great interest on the policy agenda, both at EU and national level, on climate change, on circular economy, I think that could be an important part of levels which could be driven forward before perhaps than the rest of the package, so to say.
So we're just going to give the panel members a chance to say a final comment. And Sven, can I ask you to actually, in your closing comment, refer to the role of levels in allowing us to set targets that we can actually achieve and really have measurable improvements in the environment. So this issue about bridging the gap between what we target, what we calculate, and how we then achieve that.
Sure. So very quickly again, as things stand right now, my understanding is Levels framework is effectively a sustainability accounting framework or tool, which is great, as we discussed before. So once we have this data from several projects, a number of projects, and that's, I think, the crucial point, how you can make sure the take-up is good, so that gradually you have the momentum, you have the data, and once we have the data, then we would be able to define these benchmarks, and on that basis, performance metrics, what is good practice, what is best practice in different performance metrics, again, not energy, and then let's target that. So you would be able to compare and contrast your design or the actual operation of a building, if the building is completed post-occupancy, with buildings with similar building characteristics, more or less similar context. You would be able to find which building or which statistical sample of buildings fits your example and find the best benchmark for that. I think the framework is there and is great in terms of specifying the requirements for data sharing. The only thing is how we are going to get this data. And as a voluntary framework, the risk is the uptake would not be that high unless you manage to link it to other frameworks, existing policy vehicles, and then you would be able to see the momentum. But the framework is there. Once you have the momentum, you get the data, you would be able to set these targets. One final point, if I may, very quickly. One of my research interests is air quality. And this is a finding, but also a question for Josefina, or maybe basically a feedback as part of the peer review process. I might have missed it, but having looked at level documents and the reporting tool, it was quite interesting to me in terms of pollutants. There was no mention of nitrogen dioxide. Speaking of Dieselgate, I'll carry on, yeah? Okay. So speaking of, actually it's a good background noise. White noise, yes.
It means we need to wrap up.
Exactly. So you did refer to Dieselgate, and one of the consequences of Dieselgate is, of course, NO2 emissions. Coming from London, we are already in breach of NO2 in central London, but this is not a UK problem. We have the same problem in France and Germany as well in major cities. So NO2 concentration level is a major issue in terms of pollution. You covered fine particulate matter, PM 2.5, which is great. Benzene, formaldehyde, but there was no mention of NO2. I think there's room for improvement there.
Marcus, what will you ask the federal chambers in Germany to do next? Or what would be your closing remarks? Just whichever you like.
One idea could be that we talk about having the the financial support for. It was me. Yeah, I'm a musician.
And we run out of battery just at the
to have the financial support for the sustainability schedules. Even DGNB, we do it together. But even to have levels as a start.
Thank you.
Since sometimes you have to say things twice, so usually I start when I give a presentation, I start with what is really important. Then in the middle, it comes out why it's important. At the end, I say what is really important. So, but when it comes to maybe also some advices, so Levels is a real great chance of creating this common language. It has already achieved a lot, especially what I said with the let's say this exchange between organizations, between groups that have to play. Put all the forces together to achieve the targets. And in this discussion, you sometimes find out who's your enemy and who's your friend, because the things come very clear on the table. But Levels can really unfold its potential if it's really understood as I said in the beginning, as a dialogue and decision support tool. And for this, we need adjustments. It is, at the end, a reporting tool, yes. So you can report numbers to whatever, in the level 0. So you have a target level, whatever, you fix it, and then the contract comes, and then you check whether you achieved it. So it is, of course, very important, of course, to report, but it is more a dialogue and decision tool, and therefore we need some more adjustment to the real design and optimization processes, like qualitative assessments also, and the database. Yes, it's important, but what I hear a lot is that more like example buildings are also important. That you look at other buildings which are comparable and they feel maybe the same, like like the one, and that these example buildings with indicator results are a very valuable tool to set targets for your own project. And then lastly, of course, this target value maybe for 2030 and linking it to the SDGs, which are 2030 targets. I think this would be very, very powerful for an uptake of Levels by the front runners as well.
Go ahead.
Yeah, if I have to comment on Levels, short.
Short's good.
I think it's a good start. Maybe a little bit layout for the architects.
Make it
so
pretty.
It's maybe
make
some.
It pretty.
Make it pretty. Maybe put some color in, so we can live with it. So it's just some standards you are always reading, and it could be nice with some pictures, some graphs, stories, and put in some architectural values, not only engineering numbers, but what we can see, feel, and so on. It's hard to put numbers on, but I think we should try.
Okay. I like that idea, but I think one of the things that have come out of the discussion is often you do need the numbers or an understanding of the trends of what is possible and what is hard and what we don't know yet in order to weave those stories. And you have to have the numbers underpinning the stories. And I think that's one of the key things that come out of the discussion today. And the other one was that in order to do that, to have the numbers, you do need regulation. And that seems to be a bit of a consensus amongst the speakers and maybe some of the questioners. But I will ask Josefina to just say one final, very quick word, and then we all break for lunch. Very quick. Please.
One word.
You're between everyone
So
and lunch.
I can't think of one word, but just look at our website. Follow us, please, on the website, because we will of course, now that we finish the test phase and we're starting the evaluation and so on, we will be able to come out with more information about what we have found and what we are thinking about what we have found, etc. So please follow us on the website. If you Google levels, sustainable buildings, European Commission, I'm sure you will find us. So please do that, and thanks for having listened.
Thank you so much for all your interesting questions, and it does. I'm very happy to have had all these wonderful people here today to give you an insight into something which is clearly a very fast-growing momentum around a holistic approach to environmental performance. And with that, I also a very quick thank you to Mr. Olav Luke, who is Lois. Forgive me for mispronouncing your name. Just thank you for joining us today and being the rapporteur for the day. And I know you're going to say some closing remarks at the end of the final session, which starts at 2:00. We hope you will be joining us for those too. Thank you.